Community Corner is a program that highlights the contributions of volunteer organizations, groups like the American Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity, and Crime Stoppers. These are the sorts of groups where people don't get involved because they want to make any money, but they want to make a difference. Welcome to another edition of Community Corner. My name is Richard Sennett, and I am your host at this program that focuses on the contributions of nonprofit organizations and how they make life in our Ventura County so much more enjoyable. We have today with us a man with a mission, a man who wants to correct an error that was made, some 40 years ago. Steve, welcome to the show, and tell us about your project.
Thank you, Mr. Sennett. Well, the project is the restoration of our Pioneer Cemetery here in town. Actually, the two Pioneer cemeteries. One called Cemetery Memorial Park, which is in reality the Presbyterian Cemetery and St. Mary's Cemetery. And the other cemetery is the Mission San Buenaventura Cemetery, the one that lies directly beneath the Holy Cross School right on Main Street, just west of the chapel. These cemeteries, these graves, were illegally desecrated by the governing bodies, and we're trying, a group of descendants and citizens of the city of Ventura, to politely ask the city of Ventura to restore the cemetery to its rightful place, and asking the Archdiocese of Los Angeles to remove the Holy Cross schoolhouse that's on top of the cemetery. That's in direct violation of Catholic canon law.
Now, the cemetery that was there was established in mission times for the Native American population who passed away and those early Ventura residents. That was put in because they had no more land for the school, the Holy Cross School, but they've built another school next door that isn't on a cemetery, correct?
Correct. A few years ago, behind actually, they built a two-story, a gigantic addition to their education system.
And so do they really need that old 1922 building any longer?
No, they don't. They have some square footage in the building just east of the gift shop that they could use for their clerical offices, whatever they have it. But right now, last I heard, that it was the Rosary and Altar Society used that school for a meeting once a month for an hour. Other than that, it was completely vacant and they weren't using it.
So really, there's very little standing in the way of tearing down that structure. Now, that area, did it have tombstones or anything? And what did it look like?
In that time of history, before 1862, the Mission Cemetery, you were simply buried with a blanket or a robe or the clothes that you had on in a hole, and a cross was put on your grave. For the first few years, people brought flowers to your grave. But as time went on, another person was buried next to you. The priest kept a book of the dead, Libro de los Difuntos, that said that you had died, you were given a Catholic burial, and you were buried in the cemetery. But the directions to block the lot is not there. You were buried wherever they had room at the time.
I noticed in Catholic cemeteries there's usually a large crucifix or a cross, kind of a permanent structure to take the place of those people who didn't have tombstones.
I've never seen that there at the Mission Cemetery, the old photographs. There are barely any old photographs that show it before the schoolhouse was built on top of it.
There's only one drawing. I've never seen a photograph either, but there was a drawing where you could see part of that cross sticking up over the wall of where the cemetery is located.
That'd be interesting. I'd like to see that. I just had an anonymous donor give me a photograph of somebody from behind the cemetery taking a photograph of the cemetery just as they were laying the floor joists for the schoolhouse on top of all the graves. That would be 1922 sometime. But a lot of that, the furniture of the cemetery had been removed for them to lay the floorboards to
Yes,
start
I
the
believe
building.
there was a small tomb, a few other things back there. But the larger area is Cemetery Park in Ventura, Poli and Main Street are what was at one time the east end of the community. That one has how many graves?
There's an estimated 3,000 graves, 1,000 Catholics and 2,000 Presbyterian, with a grouping of Hebrews and a grouping of Chinese. The majority of the Chumash are buried in St. Mary's. There's a dozen or so Chumash. So there's everybody is buried there. It's very a collection of the entire history of our town. Our heritage is buried right there.
Well, what actually happened? How come the headstones and other monuments were removed?
Well, up about 1963, the city was using road crews to do the gardening, to do the cleaning of the cemetery. They had come in the fall and in the spring, twice a year, to clean them up. Well, they had an idea that they didn't like the cemetery anymore, so they canceled the road crews. And they let the weed infestation grow, and they didn't clean it up in a year or two, so it looked terrible. It was an eyesore, as they rightfully claim. But they caused the problem so they could run in and give a cure. And the cure was to, the word they use is beautify. I like to say desecration, but I'm biased a little bit.
What do they mean by beautify?
Well, they wanted to beautify the cemetery and remove all of the headstones and just have you look at a memorial park, just nothing but grass. And in concept, it would be beautiful if you just saw an open area of grass. It would be fantastic. But the reality is that there's 3,000 people buried underneath in desecrated, unmarked graves. They wanted to sidestep that little bit of reality.
Well, I was told what someone called City Hall here in Ventura, and they were told by someone at the city that all of the bodies had been removed.
There was a lot of rumors that I have gone through that the city has thrown up to keep people away. At one point, the city had said that all the headstones were ground up and destroyed until we actually located the dumping sites of where these headstones exist today. They're actually very well protected, waiting to be brought back out of their hiding places.
So that they are still around.
All of the headstones still exist. It's incredibly hard. Think of it, how would you destroy a headstone? Well, you would need some big grinders that would pulverize these chunks of marble.
A big hammer or
and the city isn't going to spend money to destroy the headstones. It's a lot cheaper to float a rumor and dump all the headstones off a cliff and then cover them up with a tractor. Or put them out there at Surfer's Point underneath the parking lot and then, put the parking lot on top of it.
You brought a couple here to the set today. This one, can you tell us about what this one is right there? It's a unique one with kind of a shield on it.
This is a Civil War veteran's headstone. This is a white marble that comes from Virginia. And all veterans, including those from the Civil War, have the right to be marked in a federal grave with a federal headstone into perpetuity. Federal government makes this headstone, ships it to the grave site, and it's up to the owners of the grave to install it there on the veteran's grave. This was on Jasper Haas's grave. He was 49th Wisconsin Infantry Company C. This was illegally moved from his grave by the city. It was stolen by the city and taken up to Hall Canyon, and somebody somewhere along the line spirited it away from the city's place. That's against federal law to desecrate a veteran's grave and pull off his headstone. Just like the headstone here, Captain Kenyon, his headstone was broken off of his grave and stolen by the city and carted up to Hall Canyon, where somebody also retrieved it for safekeeping. And again, it's against federal law to desecrate a veteran's grave. We've got approximately 54 Civil War veterans buried there, 25 Spanish-American War veterans buried there, 1 Medal of Honor recipient from the Indian Wars buried there, and so far 1 World War I veteran buried there. And by federal law, all of these veterans' graves have the right to have an upright headstone marking their grave into perpetuity. But the city government says, no, we're not going to have any of that. They're in direct violation of federal law. They're also in violation of many cemetery state laws in the fact that they have turned this cemetery into a dog park. It's legally designated as a cemetery by the state of California. Now the city has says, well, we're also going to put a park designation on top of the cemetery designation, and that's against the law. You can't do that. You can make it into a park, but you have to remove the designation of a cemetery. And in order to do that, you have to exhume the 3,000 people that are there, rebury them, and at that point you can designate it as a dog park, and you can have what they want now. But until that time, until they do it legally, they're in violation of state cemetery law.
Now, I've read that there are plans the city has put forward in the local paper that they are planning to establish small plaques to show where everyone is buried, and a memorial garden that seems to look very beautiful with works of art, something like that. What do you think of that plan?
Well, that's a good way of throwing money at a problem to buy your way out of what really has to be done. They've come up with a lot of good ideas, but none of them really seem to take hold. None of them. The things that they're proposing right now are the same things that they proposed back in 1966 when they originally desecrated the cemetery. They said they were going to do these exact things, and for 40 years they haven't done them. They say they're going to do them again now. I doubt that just as much.
Well, I've walked the grounds of that cemetery park over the years, and I do notice there are some small plaques. So how did that come about?
The city, after they desecrated the cemetery, told the descendants, the families that had people buried there, that they would go back and mark those graves with a 6-inch by 12-inch black marble flush marker headstone. Mm-hmm. And for those people that wanted them, the city would go ahead and do them at a charge of $200 per person if you could prove that you had relatives buried there. So through the years, from 66 up till recently, 52 graves have been marked by the descendant families to mark those individual graves. But when we approached the city, the descendants and the Friends of the Restoration, to restore the cemetery, the city also offered this and said, if you can prove who's buried there, then we'll mark their graves. But we said, no, we need the entire place to be a cemetery, and we need every person's grave marked there with the headstones that are sitting up in Hall Canyon and below the parking lot at Surface Point. Well, the city didn't want to hear that.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Till next time, join us as we talk about the nonprofits that make Ventura such a special place to live. Thank you. Until next time.